Hello there, and welcome to a very special episode of Electric Sheep. This is our 320th subscriber special. Thank you all for watching and subscribing and commenting, and maybe it could get a share. I don't know. That's just a suggestion, but thank you for all your interactions. Without any further delay, this story is titled The Killer.
The Killer. The war did not begin with a bomb. It began with an offer. For thousands of years, the civilizations of the Orion Reach had shared medicine, knowledge, and aid. When plague struck one world, ships full of physicians crossed the stars. When famine threatened another, harvest fleets arrived before anyone starved. Doctors were sacred. Their oath was simple: life first. Then the physicians of the Hesper Collective arrived on the world of Talis. Their technology was miraculous. Broken bones were rebuilt in minutes. Organ failure became a minor inconvenience. Diseases that had haunted Talis for centuries disappeared almost overnight. The people celebrated them. Then the doctors introduced something they called compassionate departure. At first it was limited to patients enduring unbearable physical suffering who repeatedly requested death. Even then it unsettled many cultures, but they tolerated it, believing it was an internal matter. Then the definitions changed. People crippled by grief qualified. People suffering depression qualified. People overwhelmed by loneliness qualified. People who believed they had become burdens qualified. Doctors who had once been trained to fight hopelessness were now offering death as a treatment for it. Within 2 years, 10,000 people accepted, 10,000 funerals, 10,000 empty chairs, 10,000 families asking the same impossible question. Why did no one save them? The Hesper physicians defended themselves. We respected their autonomy. We ended suffering. We honored their wishes. But on Talis, those words sounded hollow. Parents buried children who might have recovered. Spouses mourned partners who had sought help and instead found permission to die. Friends remembered people who had reached out during the worst weeks of their lives. Weeks that, in countless others, eventually passed. The argument spread across the stars. One side insisted choice was sacred. The other insisted that despair was not the same thing as informed freedom. The Council of Worlds gathered. Representatives shouted for days. Then a Talis physician stood before the assembly. He was old. His white robes were stained with years of emergency medicine. He looked at the Hesper delegation. You were asked to heal. Silence filled the chamber. You were asked to fight disease. More silence. You were asked to battle hopelessness. His voice shook, and when hopelessness became difficult, he pointed toward the stars. You surrendered. The Hesper ambassador answered calmly. We ended suffering. The old physician slammed both hands onto the stone podium. No. His voice echoed through the chamber. You ended patience. The words spread throughout the galaxy within hours. World after world began reviewing the records. Thousands of recovered patients came forward. I wanted to die when I was 19. I wanted to die after losing my family. I wanted to die because my illness convinced me life would never improve. Every one of them had survived because someone refused to give up on them. Many had gone on to become teachers, scientists, artists, parents, rescuers, doctors. Their lives became living evidence that despair could lie. Mental illness had convinced them death was the answer. Recovery had proved otherwise. The debate changed overnight. If hopelessness could be temporary, then offering death during hopelessness was no act of compassion. It was abandoning someone precisely when they needed help the most. The first shots of the war were fired 3 weeks later. The Alliance of Healers declared that any government authorizing physicians to intentionally end the lives of people suffering only from mental illness had violated the oldest medical covenant in known space. The Hesper Collective called it religious extremism. The Alliance called it murder. Entire hospital fleets changed allegiance. Doctors resigned rather than carry out euthanasia orders. Others defended the practice with growing determination. The conflict became known as the War of the White Coats because soldiers often fought wearing medical insignia instead of military medals. Hospitals became fortresses. Medical schools became political battlegrounds. Every victory was measured not in conquered territory, but in laws rewritten. The Alliance refused to destroy hospitals. Instead, they occupied them. Every euthanasia chamber they captured was dismantled. In its place, they built crisis centers. Psychiatric wards doubled in size. Counselors replaced execution protocols. Research funding flooded into treatments for depression, trauma, and suicide prevention. The Alliance repeated one sentence everywhere they went: if there is life, there is hope. Some mocked it, until the numbers arrived. Worlds that replaced assisted suicide for mental illness with expanded mental health care, long-term therapy, community support, and suicide prevention saw recoveries that no one had believed possible. Lives once considered beyond saving returned to work, families, friendships, and purpose. People who had begged to die later stood before crowded halls saying, "I am grateful someone chose to help me live instead." By the war's end, monuments were raised not to generals but to healers. Across every liberated world, a new medical oath was carved into hospital entrances. A doctor may never mistake despair for destiny. Pain deserves treatment. Hopelessness deserves hope. The answer to a suffering mind is care, not death. And beneath those words, etched deeper than any others, were the words every physician was expected to remember before touching a patient. A healer fights the killer. A healer never becomes one.
I really like this story, and I'm not tooting my own horn because other than just a little bit of direction on what I wanted to be in this story, a short paragraph about what I wanted to be in the story, and a title. This is all ChatGPT. I didn't really have a rough draft for this. I did very little for this. I just asked for a war starting over, starting to do assisted suicide on people with mental health issues. I feel like that is a divisive enough issue that could start a war. And because I think sometimes don't realize whether you vote or not, what actually has become the norm in their country. And at a certain point, it's not like you can fight what is now legal or what is practiced by your country without starting a conflict. And that's not what I'm pushing for. I'm not saying because I'm against MAID that I should start a war against Canada. But I also want to pose the question, what is worth starting a war over if not 10,000 people being killed? And there have been over 10,000 people killed by medical assistants in dying. And yeah, they all agreed to it. I understand that. But we used to call that assisted suicide, and that used to be called murder. And now it's offered freely, and it's done in much larger numbers. And so I did not outline this story, but I was very happy with the results. Not happy, emotional. Many emotions. Happiness is not necessarily the word that comes to mind, but I felt the triumph of the human spirit, even if it's a story written by a machine. The idea that you help people get through their hopelessness and made it through another better part of their life, that they didn't call it quits when they could have very easily been convinced to do otherwise. Yeah. But I really like the line, we were ending suffering. And the response is, you were ending patience. And that, I will say, there is this accepted belief that the end of life is the end of suffering. But I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. But we don't know what happens when we die. I'll just leave it at that. I'm Captain Canada, Joseph Arthur Roszell. I love you. And I want you to remember that suicide is never the answer. Peace out. For now.